Music theory and Excel. Chords named by mode and modal half steps. Building chords made from the Lydian mode. Lydian chords, in other words. So get ready and some coffee, because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you excel at rockin'. And you need Microsoft Excel to excel at rocking. That's what we do. We are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay, because we basically built this from a blank worksheet, but started in a prior presentation. So if you want to build this entire worksheet from a blank sheet, you could begin back there or just keep on constructing from this point going forward. If you do have access to this workbook, though, 4 tabs down below. Fretboard, example, practice, blank. The fretboard tab having a simulated fretboard that we will refer back to. The example tab having the finished product, in essence, the answer key. Practice tab has pre-formatted cells, so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting. But if you don't have any of that, that's okay, because we're working in the blank tab where we started from scratch with a blank worksheet, and we'll be continuing with the blank part of the worksheet, this time practicing both our Excel formatting skills and our music theory skills at the same time, noting that in reality, those things are actually one and the same. Let's go on over to the fretboard to get an idea of what we will be doing, remembering that we're going to be constructing chords and trying to name them in the way that would be the most efficient naming process that we could come up with, while also being able to bridge to the current naming system for well-crafted communication, as well as well-crafted chords that make more sense from a functional standpoint. To understand that, remember the theory that we want to have, the vision of the fretboard. The fretboard is a map of the territory. They're similar to the globe. We have 7 continents on the globe. We've got 7 destination locations on our fretboard. We actually have 12 locations, but the non-destination locations are equivalent to the oceans, the things that we drive through. We might land on them, but we drive through them to the continents, to the destination locations. And then if we take our perspective from space, kind of like we're up here over the top of our guitar fretboard, then we can see that there's 12 vantage points as the fretboard kind of spins around in a circle. As it spins around in the circle, we need to know which vantage point we are looking at in order to locate the proper continent that we want to find. We call those the notes. So I'm going to say, this is the note. I'm playing in the set of chords related to A major or C major and so on. Right here, we've got, of course, the C major set of chords, meaning I'm going to visualize the continents based on this position number 4, C. And then once I get into the continents, I'm not going to rename the continents. I'm not going to call them by letter. I'm going to call them by continent name, which to us is the Ionian mode, the Phrygian mode, the Mixed Lydian, or from a Nashville number music system, the 135 here. You can see listed out. Why? Because that shifts. That's what's movable. That's what we want on the guitar. The guitar's movable. We want stuff that's movable. Okay? I don't know how many times I have to say it. People get all upset about it. I mean, it's like, it's obvious that that would be the objective. Okay. So what's the problem then? Well, the naming conventions are the problem, because like things like the interval force us in a scale degree system, renaming the continents to another name when I'm trying not to do that, because I want the same shape to be the same shape. And we thought about that last time. We also have the chord situation where we name the chords that we're going to play based on scale degrees. That works great if you're in the major key, because then you could say, yeah, we're playing the 1-4-5, the 1-4-5. Everybody knows, what that's going to mean. But when you go to the minor key, then you make the minor key the 1, and it should be the 6. So now when you say you're playing the 1-4-5, it no longer means that you're on the same continents anymore. You changed all the continent names, and you don't have to do that because all the continents are laid out in the same position. So why would you change them? No. What you should do is say, we're going to play the 6-2-3, and then everybody would know. So we talked about that last time. But not only that, but the names of the chords are based on the major key instead of based on the modes, which makes them complicated, more complicated than necessary. So if I'm playing the 1-4-5 for example, even in the key of C, when I get to the 5, we're going to name that chord a G major. But that would indicate that it has the same shape around it, and the G major triad works. But if I go to a 7 chord, then it's going to be funny because the 7 chord doesn't fit in this shape if you're saying in the same diatonic key, because it has a flat 7, whereas over here it has a major 7, which should be indicated by the modes, which is the most natural thing to do, but we don't do that, and we should do that. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to list it out in the way that makes logical sense. If we were to construct the system from scratch today, then build a bridge to what is currently in the system so you can go back and forth between the two. And I think you'll find that this will help you just think through the fretboard. Because if you strip away the implications that are behind the naming conventions, then you won't get as confused. It's like talking to a woke person, like a far leftist person. Everything they say has implications in it because they keep changing the names of the words, and you have no idea what they're talking about. They're talking about like equity and whatnot, and you're thinking they're talking about equality, and they're talking about this, that, and you're like, you have a whole nother vocabulary that doesn't seem to tie into like, it doesn't seem to be very straightforward. You know what I'm looking for is a straightforward vocabulary, and then bridge the vocabulary into the crazy bureaucrat. Then I can go to Washington and talk to them with their crazy vocabulary that they're doing all these fancy things that make no sense, okay? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to clean it up here, make it nice and clean, and then bridge it to the complicated stuff. All right, so we did this for the key of C, and I'm in the Ionian, the Dorian, the Phrygian. Now we're going to the Lydian. So the Lydian, we're back to a major mode. And you might memorize this. Basically, this is just normal standard stuff. We usually start to memorize that the 1, 4, 5 of the major key are going to build major chords, meaning that just basically means they have a major third, a 4-note away major third instead of a minor third. And then the 2, 3, and 6 are minor chords, and then the 7's the crazy diminished, which is a minor third and a flat 5th. So we're back to a major mode. So when you say 1, 4, 5 in the key of C, it would be better to think of that instead of going from major triad to major triad to major triad, to think, no, I'm going from the major triad to the Lydian triad to the Mixolydian triad, the triads being the same shape, but if I extend the triads beyond, they won't be the same shape, and that will also help me to visualize where I am on the fretboard because I'm still inside the same diatonic shape. I will also be able to name my chords by points, by the 7 points, by the numbering system, 1 through 7, or the modes, which is way cool because if I name it that way instead of by the letters, I can move it, I can shift it, which we already discussed is the point. That is the point, people. Let's not lose perspective. All right, so if we're on a Lydian, that just means we're going to start from the Lydian. From a scale degree standpoint, they would make it the 1, but the scale degree standpoint is stupid. So we're not going to make it the 1. We're just going to say, no, that's the modal center. That's like 0.0. That's still what it is. And then we skip every other note. We usually start with a triad, meaning we just skip every other note with 3 notes. Now, typically they call that then, under normal naming, F major. Why is it F major? Because it happens to have a major third if you start from there. So in other words, if I start from this F, and I go up to here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4. So we call that a major third. That would be the 1, 2, 3, but it's 4 notes away, so it's a major third as opposed to minor third. We'll get into the intervals later, but that's going to be the general idea. Now that's got the same naming convention as we had up here for the C major, right? F major and the C major. Notice there's no distinction between those two. That's kind of a problem because I'd kind of like to know a distinction from a playing standpoint. Now, no, from a stacking of intervals standpoint, you can say, well, that gives us just one name. There's always one name for that particular chord. But again, from a playing standpoint, I want to know a different name for the context of the song, right? I want to know that where I am in the diatonic system on the fretboard. So that's not giving me enough information from an actual functional playing perspective. That doesn't tell me whether the song is in that key or not. Whereas it could tell me that if I give it a different name, right? I could say, well, let's just call it a Phrygian a YF2. Now I'm calling it Y. Wait a sec. This is not Phrygian. We're on a Lydian. Did I say Phrygian before? We're on a Lydian F2. A Lydian F2. So I'm calling it Y because the L is looks like a 1, right? So I'm going to call it a YF2 for Lydian. Now the 2 represents modal whole steps. So I'm saying we're going to be on this node. I don't want to make it the 1 because the Lydian is still the 4. I'm just going to say you can call it 0. You can call it that node. We're measuring from that node 2 nodal whole steps up. So it's 2 nodal whole steps plus the one we're on, which is a 3-note chord. That's all you need to say is it's a 3-note Lydian chord, and then that will lay it out. And you might say, well, that's more confusing because I don't know all the scale degrees in Lydian. You don't need to know all the scale degrees in Lydian because you still know that it's the 1 3, it's the 1 4 5. You know that the 4 is a major chord. And that's all anybody normally knows, right? They're going to go, 1 4 5. So all they know how to do basically is to play the triad. Once you go beyond the triad, people get lost anyways. So it would be better to say, hey, look, I'm going to call that the same triad. It's still the 4 major triad if you want to think about it that way, but it would be better to think of it as a Lydian chord because that helps you understand that when you go past the 3rd, you might have things different than the major chord. That's the point, right? It's functionally better to do it that way. Okay, so then if it was, you could call it a capital Y F2, and that could help you to indicate that, hey, that's the tonic versus this is not the tonic. So that could be useful too. Okay, well, how many modal half steps are we talking here? How many modal half steps are we talking? Well, we're going to say it starts at 0 or 4, that mode, and then it's going to go up by 2 and then up by another 2, which is up by 4 from the point of 0. What is that in scale degrees? The old system, the antiquated system. Well, that would mean the old system is all off by 1. So I'm going to say if this was the 1, let's say, then I would say this would be 1 plus 2. And then this would be 1 plus 4, right? It's off by 1. So we're going to say that this then would be the Lydian would be 1 up by 2, up by 2. That would be the 1 3 5 from a scale degree standpoint. But from a modal whole step standpoint, it's going to be 1 modal whole step up and then 2 modal whole steps up, which is better because, again, you don't measure things by counting the first thing as the point that you're measuring from. We've discussed this with the basketball kid, the kid to the top of the basketball hoop. You don't count his head as the first foot when you're measuring the distance between the top of his head and the basket. That's what we're doing with the scale degrees, and it's wrong, people. It's wrong. People get upset when I say it, but when something's right, you have to say it. Even when the mob comes after you. Even when the mob comes after you, you have to say the thing. Home tab, font group, let's make this blue. If I'm wrong, you could tell me why. Tell me why I'm wrong. I'm not wrong. Anyway, let's go ahead and say this is going to be the 4. And then let's say this is going to be the 4 plus 2. And then this is going to be the 4 plus 4. All right, so now I can pick up my modes. Let's just copy this one. I won't do it again. I'll just copy that. So we're on the Lydian, and then we're on the Aeolian, and then this one you can't go above 7, so I'm going to bring this down -7. And the Ionian. So how cool is that? You can name the chord not by notes, but by the nodes that are in the chord, which means that it works for F Lydian, but also all other 11 Lydians. You could name it by, it's the 461. It's the 461 all the time. Universally works. Why wouldn't you name it that? What am I going to remember the letters? I got to remember the letters. And then I have to remember 12 different 3-note combinations of letters instead of remembering the nodes. That's more work, people. That's more work. Okay? And I can do work. It's just that if I'm doing work for no good reason, if I'm digging a hole and filling the hole back in for no good reason, then I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it unless you're beating me or something. That's not happening. Okay. What if we made a 4-note chord? then that would normally be called an F major 7, an F major 7. So they're naming it because the scale degree, if it, from a scale degree standpoint, 1, 3, 5, and then the 7. So if I was to count that out, we'd say, okay, that's going to be the Lydian, skip every other note. There's the 1, there's the 3, skip everything, the 5, and then there's the 7. Okay, that's cool. But you get some confusion as to whether it's a major, oh man, undo. Whether it's a major 7 or a minor 7, because if you just put F7, you would think it'd be a major, right? But it's actually like a minor. But it would be more clear, and you'd know what like mode you're in. Like if you just called it a P F3, let's say, meaning it's a Phrygian F chord with 4 notes. How is it 4 notes? Because it's 3 modal half steps from the one you're on, which you can call point 0, or actually call it the 4 mode instead of renaming it, right? And then you can make it a capital F3 if it was the tonic. What would that mean in terms of modal half steps? Well, I'll tell you what it would mean. That would mean we'd go from 0, which would be the Lydian, up to, which is a modal whole step, up another 2 to 4, up another 2 to 6. Okay, what would that mean in scale degrees? Well, we know the scale degree system is all antiquatedly incorrect, off by 1. So that would just be then 1, and this would be 1 plus 2, and then 1 plus 4, and then 1 plus 6. So let's go ahead and make this blue up top, because that's going to confuse me. So that means that it would say that it's going to be the 1, 3, 5, 7 if I make the note that we're on, the Lydian F, the 1. But I don't want to do that. But if you did do that, then it would be off by 1. But I'm going to keep it the 4. Why would it be better to keep it the 4? Because then I can name the 4 notes in the chord without the note names, but the actual continent names, which are all shiftable. How do you do that? Well, you start off with the Lydian. We're on the Lydian. We don't change it. We don't change it. And then we just say, if I'm on the Lydian, I go up by 2. I just go up by 2, and I'd get to 6. And if I was on the Lydian, or I go up by another 2 or up by 4, I'd get to 8. Let's bring it down. 8 minus 7 goes around the horn to 1. And then if I was on the Lydian and I go up by another 2 or 6, that would bring me too high. I'm going to bring it down, minus 7. So that means that if I copy this, I'm going to say, all right, that means I'm on the Lydian, and then I go to the Aeolian, and then I go to the Ionian, and the Phrygian. These are the fingers. My fingers would be on these destination locations. But I need to know what the letters are. Why do you need to know the letters if you've already determined where you are on the continent, on the globe of the fretboard? Right? Because it's all the same once you've determined where you are on the globe of the fretboard. What you need to know is the points to put your fingers on once you've found that location. Those points are the Lydian, Aeolian, Ionian, and Phrygian, otherwise known as the 4, 6, 1, 3. Okay? That's way more specific. Way more specific. Okay. I don't know why I'm getting all upset today. It's been pissed. Okay. Well, what if we did like a 5-note chord? I will tell you, what would we normally call it? We'd have to call it like an F major 9. An F major 9, something like that, which is kind of funny. Well, that works, right? So, but what does the 9 mean? The 9 means it's a scale degree term, but there's only 7 scales. So then they had to, why didn't they, then instead of going back to the 2, they went up to the 9 because the 2 would have been lower than the 7. And they thought that if they put a 2, then you wouldn't know that you have to do all the notes up to 7 and then add the 2, because they didn't just say, well, they could have just said, hey, you do all the odd ones and then you go back to the even one. But no, they had to say, no, we're going to make up a 9, 11, and 13 for the even one. So now we need to know that the 2 is equivalent to the 9. So what would that look like? We'd be like on Lydian, and then we skip to the Aeolian, and then we skip to the Ionian, and then we skip to the Phrygian. That would be the 1, 3, 5, 7, and then to the Mixolydian, which would be the 9, right? Which is equivalent to the 2. So, okay, that's how that's working. We'll get into that whole system later, but you can see it's a little convoluted. We're making up terms. It's like we might as well be some woke person making up new words. You know, like you don't need new words. We can use, we have words that work already. Let's make less words, and we could call it like a YF4, let's say. And that would mean that it's 4 modal whole steps up plus the root that we're on. And that's all you would need then. You just say, look, it's a 5-note Lydian F. It's a 5-note Lydian F. You just skip every other note. And if you want to make it a capital, it would be a capital Y, E, 4. And then if you want to know the modal half steps, then it would simply be, we'd go that mode you're on plus a modal whole step, or 2 modal half steps, or you can go up another 2, which would be 4 from the point of 0, up another 2, and then up another 2. So we're just gonna, that would be what it looks like. What if it was on a scale degree type of system? Then okay, we'll do a scale degree thing for the antiquated system so we can bridge between the two. We're gonna start at the 1, and then it would be 1 plus 2 would be the 3, and then 1 plus 4 would be the 5. It's all the odds now. 1 plus 6 would be the 7. And then 1 plus 8 would be the 9. But there is no 9. We're not talking distance. We're talking scale degrees. 8 makes sense because you're talking distance. 9 is stupid talk. Yeah, I know. But they made up a scale degree kind of thing, like a compound scale. I don't want to get into it. You get the idea. They made it go up. Yeah, I know it's stupid. It's stupid. Okay, but what if we started on, look, what if we started on the Lydian here, and then we named the chord by the continents instead of by like the letters? That would be we would just say it's a 4 plus 2, and then it would be a 4 plus 6, and then I'm going to bring it back down because that's too high, minus 7, and then it would be a 4 plus 8, and then I'm going to bring it down because wait a sec, I want 4 plus 2. Oh, now my fingers are fat. I hit a wrong key. Okay, let me do this again. I think I messed up. This should be 4 plus 2. And then this is going to be equal to 4 plus 4. Let me just do them all first before I fix them because it's getting complicated. And then this is going to be 4 plus 8. All right. And then I can just subtract out the 7 here to bring it back down to within the proper range. And so then if I name these, I'm on the Lydian, Aeolian. That's 8, needs to be brought down, minus 7. Oh, come on. I did it backwards. What happened now? Double click, minus 7. Why, I think, do I have the number lock on? Yes, I had the number lock on. All right. So then Ionian, Phrygian, Mixolydian. Those are the nodes that we would have to hold down. Now, on a guitar, could we hold all those down? Possibly not. We'd possibly drop some of the ones in the middle or something. but in theory, and it's just like both systems are the same, in theory, we're going to hold all of them down, and then we're going to name the last one, which under the normal system would be the 7, which would be the scale degree. Under a better system would be you just name how many notes are in the chord that are within the same mode. All right, let's go to 6 then. If we had 6, what would we have to call it? This is where it gets funny in the normal system, right? We'd have to call it an F major sharp 11. Now, what in the world is that, right? Because why F major sharp 11? Why is it a G? That's not a G. That should be a J. Okay, and that's because within the Lydian, you've got the 4. Once we get to intervals, is augmented, and the 11 is equivalent to the 4, because once they went past the 7, they didn't want to go to the 2, so they kept counting up. So you have to know, like, the 11 is like the 4, but then the 4 is augmented because they didn't want to, like, talk about modes, because they want to make it like the major scale. So even though it's in the same diatonic key, you have to do something funny and make it like a sharp 11, which is like a sharp 4, augmented 4. Okay. Yeah, you shouldn't have to do that, really. But like if you were over here on the Lydian, where you're going to skip every other note, that would be the 1, that would be the 3, that would be the 5, that would be the 7, 8, 9, and 10, 11, right? And then that 11 is equivalent to what it should be up here, the 4. See? You see how that works? I know, maybe not. Why? Because it's complicated. What would be an easier way to do it that you could totally see how it works? You could just say, hey, look, I'm in the Lydian, and I'm just going to skip every other note in the Lydian. I'm going to keep the numbering system the same, so that's easy to do because there's a Nashville music system 1 through 7. I'll just skip every other note until I get to 5 notes, which would be 6 notes, which would include the root, meaning 5 modal whole steps from that point, and that would just be a Lydian F5 or 6-note Lydian F, right? So 6-note Lydian F, the root that we're on, plus 5 modal whole steps. And if it was the tonic, I can make it capital. And that would say that's the root of the song, is what I'm saying. See how that's, look at that versus that, that versus that, that versus that. Okay? And again, if like, my argument is that, look, if all of the notes are in the same diatonic key, then you should not have to come up with names that are complicated, right? If the names are in the same diatonic key, it should be pretty easy to name the chord. It's only when you're adding notes outside the diatonic key that things should get complicated, which they do under either system, because that's where you would expect it to get complicated. But if it's not outside the same diatonic key, it should be easy. Okay. That's what I'm saying. But, so this is going to be the 1. Let's say this is going to be the 1. The scale degree is 1 plus 2. And then 1 plus 4. So it's all off by 1. 1 plus 6. And then 1 plus 8. And then 1 plus 10. All right, and so the scale degree would say it's a 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. 9, 11 being equivalent to the 2 and the 4. But that's not very helpful if I'm trying to name all of the points that I have to hold down within my shape. And I want to be able to move it up and down, not just memorizing the chord and the key of F, but memorizing the shape of a 6-note Lydian chord, which I can then play anywhere in any key. How would you just name the nodes? You name the nodes. Why? Because they're movable. The nodes are movable. All right? That's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. All right, so we're going to say it's going to be 4 plus 2. We just skip every other note, so it's 4 plus 2. It's going to be 4 plus 4. It's going to be 4 plus 6. It's going to be 4 plus 8. And it's going to be 4 plus 10. And then we'll just bring these down because you only have, so I'm going to bring this down minus 7. And then this is minus 7. There. And then needs to be minus 7. And this needs to be minus 7. There is a better way that we can do that from an Excel standpoint with formulas, but I won't get into that now. Maybe we can do that later. But we would just say, hey, look, I don't care if it's in the key of F, if we're playing an F Lydian or any Lydian. Universal Lydian 6-note chord. How would you play it? How could you name playing trivia question? How could you name playing a 6-note Lydian chord such that you could play it in any key Well, then what you do is you name it by the continent names. It would be you would just say, well, you just hold down a 4, 6, 1, 3, 5, 7, or in other words, it has a Lydian, Aeolian, Ionian, Phrygian, Mixolydian, and Locrian nodes in them. That's universal. But no one says that. I know no one says that, but it's but if it makes sense to do it that way, because then you could play the chord in any key. Like you could move between the 12 keys and it would be the same. It would be the same. I know that's not the case on the piano, all right? I still think this would be better to do on the piano, but I get that the piano has its own idiosyncrasies, which we all do. We all have our idiosyncrasies. I'm not even sure exactly what. See, now I'm making up words. No, that's a real word. That word's been vetted throughout history. They didn't make it in the last 5 minutes. Okay, let's say, what if we were going to do a seven note chord? Well, this would be, normally it would have to be called a 7-note Lydian chord, which would be all the notes in the scale, right? It would have to be called an F major, I think this is right, 13, and then sharp 11. Okay, why? Because it's an F major, which would give us the triad, but the fact that it says it's a major means it, well, kind of means it goes up, we kind of assume that the 9, 11, and 13 are major, but we already said that although the 13 is major, and the 13 is equivalent to the 6, we know that the 4, which is equivalent to the 11, is still augmented, and therefore we need a sharp on it. So again, ugly. I know it's a 7-note chord. No one plays a 7-note chord, but but they do. They might add that last note in there, so you might see something like that. And it's like, it doesn't need to be that ugly. It doesn't. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. You could just call it like a Lydian F6 chord, right, or something like that, and then a Lydian F6. 6 plus the root we're on means it's a 7-note chord, and that's all you'd need to do if you recognize that modes exist. It's just like with the women thing, right? We try to say that there's only one human thing, and then all the naming conventions get all crazy. No, you have to recognize that women exist, and then the naming conventions start to line up. They start to line up to reality. And then it's so much easier when that happens. Like when that happens, it's like, wait, hold on, stuff is making sense. The world is making sense. The words do matter. You have to use words that help people make sense of stuff. Okay? So this is going to be 0, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. And then we're going to say on a scale degree standpoint, it's going to be the 1. And then this is going to be 1 plus, 1 plus 2 tab, 1 plus 4 tab, 1 plus 6 tab, 1 plus 8 tab, 1 plus 10 tab, 1 plus 12. All right, so from a scale degree standpoint, we would make the 1 of the Lydian, and then say that we have a chord that has scale degrees of 1, 3, 5, 7, and then the 9 is equivalent to the 2, the 11 is equivalent to the 4, and the 13 is equivalent to the 6. But if we do that, then I can't name the chord in a universal naming convention. I can only name it in a language that makes sense in the key that we're in this case but I want to name it so I can move it around, right? So what I'm going to do is we're going to name it by the modal the modal points. So we're going to say, look, it would be easier to say that this is going to be the 4 because that's the Lydian, and then we're just going to say this is going to be the 4 plus 2 tab 4 plus 4 tab 4 plus 6 tab 4 plus 8 tab 4 plus 10 tab 4 plus 12, and then we'll bring it all down. 8 minus 7, 8 minus 7, and then this minus 7, and then this minus. There is a formula. We can do this better Excel-wise, but then that takes away from the manual entry, which helps with the theory. Now, this is the only time you have to bring it down again. So now it's at 9. So I'm going to bring it down again by another 7, and now we're in the range. I think that I hope that's right. I think that's right. Okay, so then that means that if that's, we would have a Phrygian. No, we're on the Lydian, and then you hold down an Aeolian, and then an Ionian, and then a Phrygian, and then a Mixolydian, a Locrian, and a Dorian. Or in other words, you just hold down the absolute modal numbers of a 4, 6, 1, 3, 5, 7, 2. You just hold those down, like, and that's how you make a 7-note Lydian chord. Okay, so it's pretty straightforward. Next time we're gonna go. Let's do the same thing for the Mixolydian next time. Now, the Mixolydian, the blues guys kind of made up their own naming convention, the 7 chords for the Mixolydian. So they've already kind of done it, but most people don't know that the 7 chords are Mixolydian kind of in nature, because it doesn't say Mixolydian in the name. It would be easier if we just say, hey, look, we just made a whole new thing for Mixolydian. Let's just call it. Let's just recognize what we did here. We put that in there, and then we kind of pretended like it's not a mode. We're still trying to say modes don't exist, but they do. The modes are there, so that's what we'll do next time.